and we are very honored today to have a collaboration between NYLESA, the New York Expatriate Spouses of UN Staff Association, and the Common Threads Project to explore some amazing work that's being done in different parts of the world, including in humanitarian contexts, to highlight and address and really bear witness to the presence of presence and impact of gender-based violence, the cost of that for individual women, for families, for communities, and for societies at large. Before we proceed, I just want to say that this is a completely unique 16 days. We mark 16 days of activism against gender-based violence every year. But this year, the whole world is in an unprecedented situation where we have all been affected by this pandemic. It has shone the light on existing inequalities at every level in society. It has shone the light on the situation of families and people in humanitarian contexts. And it's particularly shone the light on violence against women, and it's often exacerbated the challenges that women who are victims of violence, particularly in the family, face, particularly given the measures that we have seen introduced all over the world to protect people from the pandemic, have often cut people off from the support they need in this context. So it's really important today to come together and bear witness. You can see in front of you the program for the session. I would like to start off by reading some highlights from a message that has been sent in solidarity with today's event by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. I think the link to the statement in full should be available in the chat box. And you can read it in full there, but I'm just going to read out some highlights from the statement. Violence against women and girls is horrible and a widespread affront to human rights and a blight on all of our societies. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed the issue as a global emergency requiring action at all levels, in all spaces, and by all people. Even before the end of the pandemic, nearly 1 in 5 women were affected by violence of an intimate male partner, and many more women affected by all kinds of different types of violence. Earlier this year, I urged local and national governments to make the prevention and redress of violence against women and girls an urgent priority in their national response plans to COVID-19. Many states and also city governments have responded. They have increased resources for psychosocial and legal support and supported prevention initiatives, data collection, and funding women's rights organizations and partners. But much more action is needed to ensure that all women and girls feel safe in their homes and their neighborhoods. That is why we have 16 days of activism in connection with the International Convention on the Elimination of Violence against all forms of violence against women. But those days of activism and awareness need to be every day, continuously, until we end this shadow pandemic of violence. Incidents of violence against women and girls must be given high priority by police and judicial institutions. Prevention strategies which address the root causes of violence against women need to be stepped up, and safe spaces are needed, especially for grassroots women's organizations to provide essential services to hard to reach, remote and vulnerable populations. And he closes the statement by saying, let's all unite to end violence during COVID-19 and beyond. So thank you very much to the Office of the Secretary General for this important message. I believe that we also have a message from the Director of UN Women. And I think this is a really important message because it reminds us that although we mark 16 days of activism at this time of the year, every day, millions and millions of women around the world are affected. This is a struggle every day in every country, and it's something that in some way touches the lives of everybody, and it's something we should all commit to bring to an end. So just that's a statement of the UN, the director of the executive director of UN Women. So I'd like to now move on to introduce our first guest and our keynote speaker, Dr. Dubravka Simonovic, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences. Sorry, she's going to speak on violence against women and its causes and consequences. Dr. Simonovic has, for over 20 years, worked at the national, regional and global level with a primary focus on women's rights, in particular response to end prevention of violence against women. She has held different posts with the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and has served as its chairperson, its rapporteur, and as the chairperson of the Optional Protocol Working Group. She has also served as chairperson of the UN Commission on the Status of Women and as a member of the UN UNIFEM, now UN Women Consultative Committee. Ms. Simonovic holds a PhD in family law and at the University of Zagreb. She's the author of several books and articles on women's rights and violence against women. She's also lectured at a number of universities and is currently a visiting professor at the Centre for Women, Peace and Security at the London School of Economics. And I'll just correct myself, I should have addressed you as Dr. Simonovic, not Ms. Simonovic. Izvolite, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate at this extremely important event organized by Common Threads Projects and Association of Spouses of United Nations staff. I'm glad to participate as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, the mandate that was established in 1994 to send a clear message that violence against women is a human rights violation and that states are responsible to prevent violence against women, to provide services to victims, to prosecute perpetrators, and to do different coordination measures at the national level in order to have full system that will eliminate violence against women. Unfortunately, we have a long gap between international standards and realities of women and girls around the world. And during this period of 16 days of activism that started on International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we land on Human Rights Day on 10th December, we are having many events like this one. Events that are focusing on gaps between realities of women and girls and standards and obligations of states at international level. Amplifying Unheard Voices is what I have seen from presentations that I have seen before, are focusing on victim stories. And as a UN Special Rapporteur, I am visiting different countries. I am producing country reports, but when I'm in a countries, I am visiting shelters, I am visiting different places in which I am meeting victims of different forms of violence against women. And it is clear that victims' voices are not sufficiently heard. All those voices should be really amplified if we want to address violence against women in line with human rights standards. And this is the role of my mandate, to remind and to give different recommendations at the national, regional and international level how to eliminate violence against women. Let me briefly mention that on International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women, I have issued a statement in which I'm calling states to urgently take actions needed to prevent pandemic of femicide and gender-based violence against women. If we look at situation around the world and if we look at data, we will see that femicides are happening in all parts of the world. Maybe all states are not using term femicide, but they are using gender-related killing of women or killing of women by their intimate partners or family-related killings. But if you look at those categories, we can see that among 10 persons killed in a context of intimate partner killings, more than 80% of victims are women. So preventive measures should go in that direction, and we need to have a good collection of data, comparable data, to see how policies and laws are really reflective with respect to reduction and elimination of violence against women. This mandate is human rights mandate, what means that I'm always using a human rights framework, starting from Universal Declaration on Human Rights, but also international treaties like CEDAW Convention, also Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and also regional treaties. Whenever I'm visiting countries from different regions, I am also looking at applicable regional treaties like Belém do Pará Convention, that was first convention on elimination of violence against women adopted in inter-American level. And I'm, for example, when I'm visiting countries from Council of Europe group of countries, then I'm using Istanbul Convention for African countries, Maputo Protocol, and other relevant instruments like Beijing Platform for Action. We are now having additional challenges that was mentioned in introductory statement by our host, COVID-19 pandemic, that is now intersecting with pandemic of gender-based violence against women. And this intersection is really having very negative effects on women's rights around the world. With respect to violence against women, we are seeing increase of different forms of violence against women, and specifically domestic violence. When pandemic started at the beginning, I have issued a call for states to continue with measures needed to address violence against women with focus on domestic violence. Since COVID-19 lockdown restrictive measures were at the beginning gender blind, and somehow states were not really observing that in many situations home could be very dangerous place. If we look at those femicide data, and if we look at intimate partner killings are really very dangerous for women, that home could be dangerous place, then it is clear that during this pandemic and lockdown measures, shelters, protection orders, helplines, and all other measures should be available. They should not be seen as measures that should fall under those restrictive lockdown measures, but they should be seen as human rights obligations that should be available, and they should be modified if needed. For example, if shelters are not available because there is a problem with pandemic, then hotel places or other places should be available for victims of violence. And also if, for example, courts are not working and protection orders could not be issued by courts, then other ways of e-protection orders should be available, police assistance should be available immediately, and so on. But now let me mention that currently I'm working on a new report that will address rape as a form of human rights violation, gender-based violence, and crime against humanity, because it is also covered within the context of conflict and peace context. And we have to see that international norms in this area have been developed in past 40 years more than national laws. So somehow, due to the conflicts that we had in former Yugoslavia, establishment of ICTY and ICTR conflict in Rwanda also, those international courts were confronted with a situation that they needed to define rape at the international level. And this definition of rape is now, for example, followed at level of International Criminal Court. Now we also have Istanbul Convention as a new standard with definition of rape. And at international level, we can see progress that is going in direction of recognizing that lack of consent should be integral part of definition of rape. Also, if we look at definition of violence against women, it is extremely important to see the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women adopted by United Nations in 1993. Clearly defined violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that result or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering of women. And now if we look at this psychological harm and suffering, this is something what is neglected by many states. When they are defining sexual violence and when they are defining rape, this part of psychological harm and suffering is not properly included. And for that reason, this exhibition and this movement to listen victims, to have victim-centered approach is extremely important, because in many cases, we are seeing that this suffering is very prolonged. It's happening through a number of years. When I visited, for example, Nepal, I had a meeting with victims of sexual violence during the conflict. And it is clear that still today they are suffering. They have not received, some of them, medical assistance, psychosocial assistance, and so on. And we have to see that in such situations, activities by non-governmental organizations like some of those I have seen in Nepal and in some other countries could really provide additional empowerment and help to those victims when they're able to express what happened to them in different way, because during the court procedure usually they are having different role. They are trying to access justice in a proper manner, and in this situation now I'm seeing through this work on rape report that many cases are still far away from proper procedural rules that are sufficiently protecting victims of sexual violence and gender-based violence during the court procedure. In many cases, provisions like rape shield laws or provisions that are really focusing on how to properly protect victims during the process are not yet there. Also, definitions of sexual violence and rape are not in line with international standards. And this movement to have a victim-centered approach is something that is extremely important and that my mandate fully supports. So I would like to express my support to work of Common Thread Project with respect to way how victims are having voice in this situation, but the situation should be expanded at international level, because we really need to have better laws at national level that will be applicable during the peace and also later on during the conflict, with additional measures that are needed during the conflict situation to have a proper framework for addressing and eliminating gender-based violence against women. I will stop here and I will answer any questions if participants will have later on. Thank you.
Dr. Simonovic, thank you so much, and thank you for all of the amazing work that you do. It is such an honor to have you with us today, and I really pick up three things that you've said that kind of, to me, relate to also very much the work of Common Thread. The importance, obviously, while we seek justice and prevention to respond to violence against women, but also ensuring that victims are heard, have a voice, and that they are represented. And thirdly, the important thing of helping them to recover from the psychological, emotional, and traumatic impacts of that violence as being three interlocking streams that come out of the work of, that is at the heart of what grassroots activists are doing all over the world, and I know that their work is at the forefront of this struggle. Before we move on to join Common Threads and some of the colleagues working on that, I'd like to briefly hand over to our hosts from NYLESA, and I would ask Yen to say a few words.
Thank you all for joining our event today. And we just like to take a few minutes to share with you why we are co-hosting this event. So NYLESA is the New York Spouse Association. We was founded nearly 10 years ago, and we are part of the network of LESA around the world. Our members has come from nearly 70 countries, with different countries, and we speak many languages. And from the beginning, we set out clear two missions: to support UN staff spouses and partners to settle and enjoy life in New York. Our activities include providing support to our members, new UN family moving to New York with the Welcome Pack or the resource on our website. We organize a number of gatherings, coffee gathering, cocktail, but also events for members to share their countries with other members or practice language. We also have a lot of other events for members, and our members is like knowledgeable helpline, because anyone could have a question. If they have a question, then they can just ask other members, like say if they want to renew their driving license, or where to get a COVID test, quick COVID test. They can ask other members. During COVID-19 pandemic, we actually even organize even more activities for our members. Firstly, is online, and then as the situation got better here in New York, we organize a lot of outdoor activities. We want our members to feel connected and have the no one have to feel isolated during this difficult time. We have Julian, our career support, to talk about the career support activities about NYLESA.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So our second mission as a spouse association is to support our members for the professional path. Can you go to the next slide, please? So we recently did a career survey to assess our members, and what points out is that they are highly qualified, with all of the respondents having at least a bachelor's degree and covering almost any industry or field. Can you next slide, please? Thank you. So we are also year-round organizing activities to help our members hone their skills on how to adapt to the local market here in the US, how to improve the skills, how to go through the whole process of applying a work permit, finding a job, and landing a job. And to do that, we host a lot of activities of workshops and peer review, either with only internal facilitators or with external ones. And we also have a database of all relevant information and documents to help our members through this professional journey in the US. And we sometimes also get some pro bono or consulting job posting from some UN members, and we circulate them among our members. As spouses here in the US, we have some challenges to overcome, mainly as even if we are qualified and skilled, it's still difficult to land a job here in the US, and the process is long. As spouses, we may find it difficult to live through the situation because we find it a bit uprooted from our professional network, from our professional knowledge, and we find out that we may not check all the boxes that local recruiters might expect. And so it's our association of the utmost importance to help us overcome these challenges and support each other for the all benefit of our members on their professional path. So I'm going over to Yen.
So as NYLESA is actually fully managed and functioned by volunteers. As part of this 16 days campaign, there's a special day actually on Saturday. December 5th is the International Volunteer Day. And we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge contribution from our members. But really, we would really like to recognize the work of one special volunteer, Vesna, who found the Common Threads Project and helped amplifying voices of women and girls who survive sexual violence. So we here today to support the cause of the 16 days of activism against violence, against gender-based violence. But we also would like to amplify Vesna's story. Her inspiring story can motivate other UN spouses to volunteer, to stop gender-based violence, or contribute to other sustainable development goals, issues that the UN promoted. And we also, Vesna case is an example to show the talented resource that NYLESA have, and maybe the UN and other non-profit organizations should tap into. Let's hear from Vesna's story and story of women and girls who survive sexual violence. Thank you.
So, well, before I give the floor to Vesna, I'd just like to introduce her a little bit and say that Vesna is from Croatia. She specializes in community-based approaches to assisting refugees from grassroots level to international level. Since 1995, she has been involved in assisting refugees through humanitarian aid and psychosocial support programs, which are crucial and often overlooked in humanitarian response, particularly in the former Yugoslavia, which is where Vesna indeed comes from. She served as director of the Group 484, an NGO in Serbia that promotes the rights of forcibly displaced people. She's led community development programs in Australia for refugees and asylum seekers from Africa and Asia, and developed and led capacity development programs for NGOs serving refugees in Malaysia in association with the UN High Commission for Refugees. Since 2019, she's been living in New York, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Vesna. Izvolite, Vesna.
Well, thank you, Ben, for your kind introduction, and to Yen as well. I am honored to be here today alongside our distinguished speakers, Special Rapporteur, Mrs. Dr. Dubravka Šimonović, my NYLESA colleagues, and my Common Threads colleagues. I know there are many people in the audience today who I know. Thank you for coming and for supporting this, this important cause that is so dear to me. I'm here as a volunteer of both Common Threads Project and NYLESA. These two organizations have connected through me and joined their forces to amplify the voices of women who survive sexual and gender-based violence during these 16 days. Like other UN spouses, when we move to another country, to a new country, I also have to rebuild my career path, find new contacts, and that's why it's so important for me to have this association, NYLESA. that helps me enormously to meet people with similar experiences and to navigate the maze of this complex environment, New York City. And volunteering with Common Threads Project, I do what I know and what I love. I work in a non-governmental organization that reaches to the very grassroots level, where people are whose lives are shattered by war and violence and conflict. There are countless examples really of UN spouses contributing through their professional and volunteering work to the causes, different causes of the United Nations. In Malaysia, I worked with a group of volunteers, expert spouses building capacities of NGOs. Here in New York, as we are sharing this support to 16 days of violence, of activism against violence against women. Here in NYLESA, amongst our membership, we have heard many stories of members who are working in the field of addressing gender-based violence. So just to mention a few, Maria Barnes, who evaluates the projects of international programs that address female genital mutilation. Our colleague Carmen Rodriguez, who focuses on school-based violence in association with UNICEF. Our Andrea Oliveira, who assisted provision of social services to survivors of gender-based violence in Brasilia. And they all tell us how committed they are to United Nations values. I have joined Common Threads Project in building solidarity with women survivors by helping to make the exhibition that we are going to see today, The Fabric of Healing, the exhibition of story cloths of women who have survived violence and that amplifies their voices. This exhibition will give us a valuable opportunity to bear witness to the suffering, courage, and transformation of women who survive violence. By viewing this exhibition, we participate in the process of healing, as the people who told their stories need the world to hear and to know what happened to them. We can also support Common Threads Project work by volunteering, donating, and fundraising for them. And just a few words about my work with Common Threads Project and the experience. When I first met Dr. Rachel Coyne, who will be speaking today, our director of Common Threads, she told me about her work, and I immediately understood that Common Threads Project is an organization that reaches women who are in the remote areas, who are in dire need of psychological recovery, and that the project adapts really well to the local situation, local realities and cultures of people who it works with. It doesn't only heal women, it actually builds capacities of the organizations on the ground to provide healing in these communities. And it also rebuilds lives of the families, because when a woman's life is shattered, then the family is shattered too. And as this chain of healing continues, Common Threads Project also contributes to recovery of these communities shattered by war and violence, and opens the door for peace and recovery. And for us today, this project also mobilizes resilience, rejection of violence, empowers all of us who participate in it. We get a role, a place, and a meaning in fighting violence against women. I also want to just give small notion, short, but very important, to the organizations who are working with the Women for Common Threads Project in the field. Rachel told me a very important story of of the organizations in Ecuador who go to the borders of Colombia, where people need to be reached by traveling by boats for many hours. These organizations are very important, and it is my personal mission to have NGOs helped on the ground to do their very important work for all of us. So today I want to share with my UN family this opportunity to participate in healing. I'm inviting you to see the exhibit, The Fabric of Healing, and to extend your support to Threads Project, to always keep in mind the amazing human capacity as we as UN spouses have and give to the world in which we live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vesna, and thank you also for your excellent volunteer work in this field. I'm going to pass on now to the director, Rachel, Dr. Rachel Cohen, of the founder and the director of the Common Threads Project. Dr. Rachel Cohen is a clinical psychologist specializing in psychological support for women and girls who have been subject to trauma. She's been in practice for over 35 years. She founded the Common Thread Project in Geneva in 2014 and has served as its executive director. She's designed recovery projects in the developing world, training local staff and implementing interventions in post-conflict areas, including Bosnia, Southern Sudan, Uganda, DRC, Ecuador, and Nepal. And she has earned her doctorate from the University of Michigan in 1986 and has a certificate in global mental health from the Harvard Program on Refugee Trauma. Dr. Rachel Cohen, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that lovely introduction and for being our host today. I also want to thank you, Vesna, for that beautiful talk and for your amazing work with Common Threads Project. Thank you to our special rapporteur, Dubravka Shimonovic, and to NYLESA for hosting this event. Amplifying unheard voices means that we recognize those people who usually remain out of view. Our co-sponsor, NYLESA, is comprised of people who enable the work of the UN in very important ways. But as spouses, they generally remain invisible. Their voices are usually not heard, but today I'm really glad that we have a chance to listen to them. And I was once a UN spouse as well. You know that this is both a privilege and a challenge. I resisted the role a bit at first. Of course, I had promised myself I would never just follow my man as a feminist. But this pivot turned out to become a life-changing experience for me. Our move to Geneva 10 years ago started me on a path that ultimately became Common Threads Project. And now as we continue that work, Vesna has become central to the growth of this organization. She envisioned the Fabric of Healing exhibit of story cloths that you'll have a chance to see today. These are story cloths made by survivors. And during these 16 days of highlighting the struggle against gender-based violence, this exhibition will enable us to really hear the silenced voices of courageous survivors as they tell us about their experiences through those narrative textiles.
Great. Dr. Cohen, we've got some slight technical problem. Can you, I think it's okay now. I will proceed with the questions.
Sure.
Great. So can you tell us, the Fabric of Healing is an exhibition of story cloths. Can you tell us what the story cloths are and why they are made?
Sure. Yeah, they're not made to be an art exhibit, although they're quite stunning, as you'll see, and worth looking at. They're really made as part of an intensive therapeutic process that's designed to help women and girls recover from the severe psychological consequences of sexual violence, war, and displacement. They're part of a complex intervention that we've developed that has many components to it. But at the center of it is the idea that we want to identify an effective pathway. So we have borrowed from an ancient practice that actually occurs across many, many different cultures, where women come together to support one another, and they sew their experiences that they cannot speak about into cloth. And they narrate what they have been through in a non-verbal format by stitching their story cloths. And this is a phenomenon that exists in so many different cultures. You can find remarkable examples of those who have been silenced finding their voices in this way by stitching story cloths. There were the Chilean arpilleras made during the dictatorship of Pinochet. There are quilts, multitudes of quilts by African-American women who were enslaved. There are story cloths from South Africa explaining the experience of apartheid, and from the Hmong people in Laos, and the list just goes on and on. What's fascinating to me is that this tradition is actually validated by current neuroscience in the understanding of how trauma works in the brain. Because, well, researchers are finally discovering what these women in sewing groups seem to have intuited all along for centuries, that trauma is processed, in non-verbal channels, not through words. Actually, during moments of trauma and mortal threat, the verbal centers of the brain actually shut down and go offline in order to promote survival. And what lights up are the visual centers of the brain in order to scan the environment for survival, for escape, for a pathway out. And so actually trauma is recorded in images and in the sensory motor system. And this means that words in psychotherapy often aren't up to the task of accessing trauma and healing. And images are actually much more effective for that. The point is that story cloths can actually be used to make possible a gradual and safe disclosure of the trauma experience, and opens the door for a healing process, which is not a quick fix. We need to understand that. It is actually a long-term and gradual process. But using story cloths means there is no pressure to verbalize and no rush to re-enter the trauma experience. The topics of their artwork and the pacing are actually directed by the survivors themselves. The slow, rhythmic, focused, meditative action of hand sewing is intrinsically calming and allows the women to tolerate an emotionally intense process in a grounded body state. The group setting, too, is essential. It encourages the mutual support and assurance that one is not alone in this experience. They're walking a path with others toward healing. The women tell us that it brings them relief to put their inner pain out there in this intricate, beautiful object, which also gives them a sense of mastery to create these. So we find that participants use the story cloths to move from shame and social isolation and stigma into connection. They share their experiences with one another. They feel understood.
This is fascinating, Dr. Coyne. I think that one of the things that's really important to highlight here is the link between all of this and the scientific research, the neuroscience. We of course, when we look at low-income contexts, for example, on the continent of Africa, there's only one mental health professional per 100,000 population. So the only, you need to have grassroots interventions, building on basic, forms of relationships and expressions to help people to recover. And this work is excellent for that. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how do you make it resonate across cultures in different contexts?
Exactly. Well, here you see a survivor speaking about her story in DRC, and you can just feel the way that she has moved from shame and stigma into a sense of pride and dignity. And this is something that what we're finding, our approach, Ben, as you mentioned, it's key really to both effectiveness and to ethical practice, that we work in a culturally appropriate and with cultural humility. So what we do is capacity building. As you say, there are areas in which there's very little mental health capacity, and we seek to build that, but to do so in true collaboration with our local partners. So they adapt the intervention for their own culture and community, and really are co-builders with us of the project. Where we have been in Ecuador, in DRC, in Bosnia, and in Nepal, and now also with displaced women in the United States. So these are key issues that you bring up that we are trying to pay very close attention to as we work to build capacity, to train and supervise and mentor, and to really work alongside as equals with our local partners. They are the real heroes who work doing the heavy lifting every day.
Dr. Cohen, I understand we're going to see a video in a moment, and then we'll go to some Q&A from the participants. My final question before we do so is how can people watching this, participating in the webinar, how can they help?
Well, you've taken a first step to help today by joining us. That's number one. We're going to urge you after we finish to really visit the exhibition, and in particular to leave your comments in the exhibition. You'll find a blue pocket there, and the women who make these story cloths really need to know that you hear them, you understand them, you stand in solidarity with them. It means the world to them to know that we are on the journey with them. So that's another way you can help. And of course, Common Threads Project is looking to expand, to reach more survivors, to be able to strengthen our intervention further. And you can help us in gaining visibility with others, and sharing this message with your friends and colleagues, in being in touch with us, and supporting our efforts both financially and in the ways that we are trying to grow and strengthen Common Threads Project as we pursue our mission. So those are some ways initially to help. I'd like to show you this video, and then I'd like to have a moment to share with you some story cloths so you understand what it is we're talking about, and you can hear some voices. I'm afraid we need to unmute, maybe. Thank you.
तो जो 2 साल का अरसा था, उसमें हमने अपनी लाइफ ऐसे समझते थे जैसे हम किसी जेल में आ गए हैं, जैसे हम बंद हो गए हैं। ऐसे लगता था जैसे हमारी लाइफ बिल्कुल स्टिल हो गई है। हमें अपना आप ऐसा लगा कि हमारी कोई वैल्यू है, हमें अब जिंदा रहना चाहिए। हाँ, हम कुछ काबिल हैं, हम कुछ कर सकते हैं। और वैसे हमें लग रहा था हमारी लाइफ बिल्कुल खत्म हो गई है, लेकिन उससे हमें एक वो हौसला मिला, हम दोबारा अपने आप को हमने जिंदा रहने की तरफ जो है वो कि हमारी भी कोई
Thank you so much. Do we have an additional video, or we will go to Q&A?
We have some story cloths to show.
Great.
And we have a video from one of our local facilitators in the field, if we have a moment for that.
Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Here's Amparo, extraordinary woman in Ecuador.
Puedo decir que fui testiga de grandes cambios. Una de las cosas más gratificantes y entrañables fue ver cómo las mujeres fueron transitando de un estado de ánimo, digamos así, a otro. Verles cómo llegaban cargadas de mucho dolor, de mucha tristeza, y a lo largo del proceso de arpilleras, ver cómo fueron transitando desde la ira, desde la frustración, desde la tristeza tan profunda, fueron transitando a la serenidad y a la calma. Yo creo que uno de los grandes cambios que pude ver y ser testiga es cómo las mujeres se apropiaron de su propio dolor, pusieron un nombre a lo que les estaba pasando y fueron capaces a lo largo de todo el proceso de gestionar, hacerse cargo de sus propias emociones y, ya digo, transitar desde el dolor a la esperanza.
Thank you, Vesna. I think we'll just take a quick moment to skim through some story cloths. I actually won't have time to tell you as much about them because we're running a bit behind here, and I want to save a little bit of time for the Q&A as well. So why don't we put up slide 8, and I'll tell you just very briefly. This was made by a survivor in the DRC. It's called Forced to Marry My Rapist. Marianne was a young woman who was brutally raped and held captive by a perpetrator. But in order to save face, her family and the perpetrator's family tried to force her to marry this man. And here you see her just before she fled, and she actually escaped and found safety at our partner organization, where she made this story cloth in our program called Kamba Moja in Swahili. And what's amazing about this is she says, when she reflects about the story cloth, she looks at it and she says, I have made myself invisible because no one really sees me. And after she made that comment, the facilitator of the group began to ask the other women in the group also, how does it feel to be invisible? Yeah, and they had quite a rich discussion about that. Let's go on to the next one. As you can see, we could spend all day looking at these. This was made by a woman who lost her daughter to rape and murder at the hands of paramilitary in Colombia, and she escaped to Ecuador, where she joined the Common Threads Project there. She came in quite frozen and severely depressed and unable to grieve the loss of this daughter. As she neared the end of the program, she added 2 bright objects into this story cloth: the rose bush that you see in the foreground and the yellow bird on the side. They were added later after she had done some healing and accessed grieving. And she said of these, when she was asked by the group, she said, well, the rose bush, that is my daughter's soul that keeps on blooming now. And the bird, that is her voice. I can hear it again. Let's go on. I realize that these stories can be quite triggering, so please do take care of yourself as you look through the exhibition. We're going to skip this one, Vesna. I urge you to, what you will find is that when you go into the exhibition, this one is from Nepal. As you approach the cloths, you will hear an audio come on that will tell you something of the story behind the story. And let's go on to finally this one, the last slide. This is from one of our Kamboja groups in the DRC. It's a collective story cloth that was made about rape in the mines, called Dark Places in the Mine. I was given this story cloth when I visited the circle of women, and they said to me, take this story cloth with you. Tell our story. Make sure that the world knows what is happening to us. And this is the very promise that I'm trying to keep today by sharing these story cloths with you and by inviting you to the virtual exhibition.
Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for sharing those with us and reminding us that we are here really to bear witness to these stories that are so often taboo and hidden and unheard. And it was a real privilege to have you with us today. You mentioned, and I could have mentioned earlier, that for some people that have maybe been affected by different forms of violence or trauma, this can sometimes be triggering. So we are adding the contact of Common Thread if you want to seek referral or support or other kind of conversation about that, then we can help you to identify a person to speak to for a referral. I am now going to open up, we've only got a few minutes left for any questions that you may have. Any Q&A? I know some Q&A have been answered already online, but if we have any burning questions for Dr. Simonovic, for Dr. Cohen, we will be happy to take them. Although I can see something in the Q&A. So we've got a comment here from Amelia. Dr. Rachel Cohen, what a crucial work Common Threads Project developed to build new capacities and give hope and visibility to so many different realities. How has the COVID-19 and lockdown affected the development of the project? Thanks. Thank you for the question, Amelia.
Thank you so much. Yes, as you can imagine, there have been enormous challenges during COVID, as we know that the shadow pandemic, as has been spoken about, that that incidence of gender-based violence has only increased throughout the world. And at the same time, access to services has become more complicated. In our circles, depending on country, several of our programs have had to shut down completely because our partner organizations are unable to open their doors at this time to provide the services that are needed. In other contexts, we've made adaptations. In the DRC, after a couple of months of shutdown, when it became possible to meet again, the women really took the initiative themselves, began to send text messages to our facilitators saying, when can we meet? We need to be meeting again. And we've developed an adaptation for meeting safely during COVID. The women made their own masks. They set up in towns where there's no running water, they managed to set up hand washing stations. They have been so tenacious, the survivors themselves, saying we need each other. We are not going to get through this alone. And so we've tried to make that possible. They've also needed additional supplies, and we've done some fundraising to help them be able to meet safely. In fact, in Nepal, where COVID is right now raging so badly that there's no way that groups can meet in person, the women in the circles have asked if we would help them to be able to meet remotely, and we actually have done some fundraising to purchase some tablets for them so that they can convene together by distance. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. We also have a question for Dr. Simonovic. You referred to a report in your talk, and many participants were interested to know how they could access it. You're on mute, Dr. Simonovic.
Okay, there is a mandates website. If you put Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, you will see all reports published by previous Special Rapporteurs and my reports. I have published up to now 10 reports, and I have visited 10 countries. So all reports are there, as well as this femicide initiative that I have mentioned, and also IDVO platform regional initiative, or initiative that is connecting UN and regional expert mechanisms like my mandate, CEDAW committee, Gravio committee, Vesekvi, and other 7 of us that are now trying to speak in one voice when we are dealing with issues related to elimination of discrimination and violence against women. And just in conclusion, I would like to mention that reparations are extremely important for all victims of gender-based violence, and they include different measures such as monetary compensation, legal and social services, health services, but also mental health services. And this is really example how this project is addressing mental health problems, because many times victims are not speaking at the beginning. Even in situations, for example, of my country, Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, for a period of 10 or 15 years, they were not speaking. And now suddenly they are speaking up, and they are able to explain what happened during the conflict. So I think that those openings that are possible through different projects like this, I have seen some other projects using drawings, using recording stories and so on. They're all going in direction of really opening up spaces for victims to open and to address those mental health problems and to receive mental health services. So I think that this is really a moving example how project like this could support everything that is needed in this area of effective reparation for victims of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simonovic, Dr. Cohen, Vesna, Golic, Yen and Julian. Thank you all for the participation. We are now at time and would invite you to visit the exhibition. There is a link here on the screen you can see. We invite you all to enter the gallery and to see this amazing work, but also to think about what it represents and how it is not just a process of representation of women affected by violence, but also essential to the recovery process. We'd like you to, what was really important, what came out in a lot of the preparation for this was that was the importance for the women involved, that people bear witness, that this story be told and shared and amplified, that these unheard voices be amplified, and 16 days of activism is a perfect time to do that. I want to thank everybody for your involvement today, and especially NYLESA and Common Thread for organizing it. Wishing you all the best. Thank you.